Welcome to CTPAT Security Services Risk Assessments Training. Companies who are members of supply chain security programs sponsored by governments are required to annually conduct risk-based assessments of their supply chains. U.S. Customs has a recommended 5-step risk assessment process, which is widely accepted as a method for conducting risk assessments. So that is the method that we will be addressing here. This is the 5-step process. Step 1 is cargo flow mapping. Step 2 is threat assessments. Step 3 is vulnerability assessments. Step 4 is to have a plan for correcting deficiencies or vulnerabilities. And step 5 is to document the entire 5-step risk assessment process. We will now address step 1, which is cargo flow mapping. First, you must map out each step of the supply chain from the point where cargo is loaded into a container to the point where it is unloaded in the next country. The supply chain steps should include the shipper or factory, the foreign trucking, the consolidation facilities, the ports of departure and arrival, any border crossings, the carriers, sea, air, rail, or truck, any agents involved in the process or customs brokers, the final destination, which is where the cargo is unloaded, and that could be the importer's facility or it could be a third-party warehouse. Each company in the supply chain must be identified by name. You must also indicate the certification status for each supply chain partner, such as noting that they are not CTPAT certified, or that they are CTPAT certified, or that they have an AEO certification or some other type of supply chain security certification. For each supply chain step, you must indicate whether that business partner handles the cargo, has custody of the cargo, or only processes paperwork. Any supply chain step where the business partner has custody of the cargo or handles the cargo elevates the risk level. For each supply chain partner who is a transportation provider, you must indicate who selects or hires or approves the company. This is because the company that hires the transportation provider has the greatest amount of influence over that company. They are best able to get them to complete security questionnaires and comply with other screening and security measures. For each transportation provider in the supply chain, you must also indicate who tracks and monitors the cargo. This may be a single company or multiple companies may be tracking at the same time. For each supply chain step, you must indicate how many days the cargo is at rest if the cargo is waiting and or in transit if the cargo is moving. Step 2 of the 5-step risk assessment process is threat assessments. Threat assessments measure the potential threat level for a country or for a region. Threat assessments should be conducted for each country or region from which the cargo originates, also for the countries that the cargo passes through, or for the countries or region which are the final destination. The threat level for several factors should be investigated, reported, and then ranked as 1 for low, 2 for medium, or 3 for high. The threat level investigations can be conducted by accessing government websites and by doing general web searches for news articles, reports, etc. You can also use first-hand reports from local residents. The first threat factor to be investigated is terrorism. That would include political, biological, agricultural, or cyber terrorism. Is there an active terrorist threat in the area? Have there been recent terrorist attacks? Are known terrorist groups operating in the region? These are the things that must be investigated and taken into consideration. The second threat factor that must be investigated is smuggling of contraband. Are smuggling operations prevalent in the area? Are drugs being smuggled? Weapons? Cash? These are the things that must be investigated and taken into consideration. The third threat factor is human smuggling. Are human smuggling operations common in this region or country? Does the country have an ongoing problem with illegal entry or sex trafficking? These are the kinds of things that must be investigated and taken into consideration. The fourth factor is organized crime. Is organized crime prevalent or present in the area? This is what must be investigated and taken into consideration. Threat factor number 5 is theft, piracy, hijacking, or counterfeiting. The presence of these types of activities increases the likelihood that cargo shipments may be compromised. The sixth and final threat factor is poverty, social unrest, and political instability. Any of these conditions may foster the development of previously mentioned threats, so it's important that they be identified and ranked. You must assign a final threat level ranking to the country or region that is being considered, such as 1 for low, 2 for medium, or 3 for high. This overall ranking should be achieved by using an average of the individual factor rankings. A threat level ranking of 3 or high in any category should result in a 3 high ranking for the entire country or region. Step 3 of the 5-step risk assessment process is vulnerability assessments. Vulnerability assessments measure potential vulnerabilities and risks of each supply chain step or each supply chain business partner. You should create a list of the potential risks and vulnerabilities of each supply chain step or each supply chain business partner. Some examples of what these risks might be are the employees, the loading of containers, or the fact that they have custody of the cargo. For each identified risk, you must list a mitigation measure that has been implemented to lower the possibility that each risk or vulnerability will occur. For example, if the identified risk is an employee, then the mitigation measure might be that the business partner is screened to ensure that they have proper hiring procedures. For each identified vulnerability or risk factor, they should be ranked by either 1 for low, 2 for medium, or 3 for high. The first vulnerability factor is the country or region where the business partner is located. Refer to the threat assessment you conducted for that area or region to find out if it was ranked low, medium, or high. The second vulnerability factor is volume. Generally speaking, the higher the volume, the higher the risk. The third vulnerability factor is membership in government-sponsored supply chain security programs. Membership in any type of a supply chain security program, even those offered by private companies, are considered better than not having anything at all. But membership in a supply chain security program sponsored by a government would be considered the best option when available. The fourth vulnerability factor applies only to those supply chain steps that are a transportation step. In assessing this vulnerability, you should be taking into consideration the type of transportation. Trucking is always considered the highest risk step of the transportation process because the cargo is in the custody of a single person, the driver, who could be hijacked, threatened by criminals, or have his family threatened by criminals. It's also a possibility that the driver could be a criminal or a part of a criminal conspiracy. The fifth vulnerability factor is to consider whether the company handles the cargo or has custody of it, or only processes paperwork. Companies that only process paperwork would generally be considered to be of a lower risk than companies that actually handle or have custody of the cargo. The sixth and final vulnerability factor is to consider whether the business partner has a history of previous security violations. A company that has had past problems related to supply chain security should receive a high risk ranking. It is the responsibility of companies that are certified in a supply chain security program to ensure that all of their business partners are meeting minimum security criteria, whether that business partner is certified themselves or not. A security questionnaire should be sent to each business partner, and then the answers assessed to determine if the company is meeting the minimum criteria. It is not acceptable to receive a security questionnaire from a business partner and just file it away without reviewing it. The security questionnaire must be reviewed, and for those responses that are not acceptable, there must be a follow-up process. As part of the follow-up process, you should notify business partners of those deficiencies on their security questionnaire and ask them to come up with a plan for correcting them. Supply chain business partners who have received an elevated risk ranking should receive further scrutiny. This might include an on-site visit to verify that reported security procedures are actually in place and being followed. Step 4 of the 5-step risk assessment process is corrective actions. The risk assessment process must include a way of addressing serious supply chain security-related deficiencies that have been discovered. The corrective action process must be documented. Things that should be addressed by the corrective action process include any deficiencies that have been detected, supply chain security breaches, reports of suspicious persons or activity, and process failures, where it is discovered that internal security measures are not being followed. The documented corrective action process should include what constitutes an issue requiring a corrective action and what steps are to be taken to identify the root cause, the corrective measures, and preventative measures to prevent future occurrences. The documented corrective action process should also include a follow-up or an evaluation process to ensure that measures have been implemented and are working. The final step of the 5-step risk assessment process is to document the entire process. The entire risk assessment process, which has been discussed in this presentation, must be documented. The documented risk assessment procedure should include identification of the 5 steps or requirements and step-by-step instructions of all steps taken to fulfill each requirement. The documented corrective action procedure may be included as a sub-procedure in the documented risk assessment, or you may want to create a separate or standalone corrective action procedure. The documented risk assessment procedure should also include a requirement that the risk assessments be reviewed annually and updated for each supply chain. All 5 steps of the risk assessment process should be reviewed annually and include review of the cargo flow mapping, threat assessments, and vulnerability assessments. The documented risk assessment procedure should also include a requirement for conducting an internal audit annually to measure your company's internal compliance to all of the supply chain security related documented policies and procedures. The annual internal audit must be documented and should include a way to identify deficiencies and corrective actions. The documented risk assessment process must also include a means for ensuring that deficiencies and corrective actions identified by the annual internal audit have been addressed and corrected.